Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be interviewing Jeff Thomson. Jeff is a busker. I love buskers. This is the first time I've had a chance to interview a busker, so I'm really excited about it. Jeff's going to be joining us in a few minutes. Well, hey, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
I don't know how much you've seen the channel that I do, but I do occasional interviews. I love to do interviews. I'd like to do more interviews. So I'm really glad you accepted. Appreciate
Sure.
it. And busking has been a fascination of mine for a long time. I've not busked though. I haven't.
Okay.
So I'm anxious to talk to you about that.
Yeah, definitely.
I watched your video and it was a great video. I thought the cups and ball routine was fantastic.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It's not the standard Vernon that everyone else does, which is really good.
Yeah, that was the first thought when I came together with the routine. Obviously, Vernon's routine is used and performed for a reason. It's structurally as sound as you can get. But I wanted to do a different routine. So
now, is that your routine, or was it inspired by somebody else?
So there's a fair number of inspirations, certainly my routine, I think, is fairly original because I use a combo set of cups, and I think Mendoza does a routine with that. I think maybe Ricky J
does, yes.
And for me, it was mostly about putting together the sequences that I personally really enjoyed from different cups and balls routines. So there's a little Gazzo in there. There's the standard, I think, is it Bosco sequence where you put them away and then they all come back. The Charlie Miller move is used. So for me, I just wanted to create the sequences that I liked and then had to figure out how to put them all together. But I appreciate you noticing that.
Now, if I didn't clarify, we're talking about your cups and ball routine.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
If I didn't say that earlier, I want to make sure I clarify that. And by the way,
yes.
I can put links down below so people watching this can go catch up on that. But
sure.
it is a stellar routine, and of course the final load sequence is amazing. And
well, I think that also works particularly because there's a lot of time misdirection, which I think a lot of people or a lot of magicians, we're worried about misdirection during a move, but we don't also understand how time itself can be used as a misdirection. So the reveal at the end, I've done a hat line. The final loads are sitting under the cups, but I do a hat line and then I do a sequence with the hat, which is similar to Gazzo. But I try to those final loads are sitting there for a little bit.
Well, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. So during that video, you gave sort of a thumbnail history of your development as a busker. And you said that you started in San Diego when you were 14 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You want to elaborate on that a little bit? 14 years old, San Diego?
Yeah, so I was born in San Diego, raised there. I learned magic in middle school. I saw David Blaine's Drowned Alive special, and that was my first kind of real magic special on television that I saw. Became inspired, learned magic, and I was always extroverted. So inspired by David Blaine's style, after learning some card tricks, I would then go up to people at a shopping mall. Hey, do you want to see some card tricks? Do you want to see some tricks? And then I took a trip to Boston with my mom to see some family in later middle school, 2 years after I started learning magic. Stopped by Hank Lee's and then saw a juggler outside Faneuil Hall doing, I think, the biggest circle show I had ever seen in my life. uh, just a huge circle show. We walked in late and to the show, and the busker said,
This was in Boston, yes?
this is in Boston on this trip that I took with my mom. I had just learned magic, but this was my first busker that I had seen live. And he said, who wants to see magic or juggling? And I didn't know it was a juggling show. So I yelled magic. He had a hat. He pulled a fake rabbit out of it. He reached into the rabbit and then pulled a hat out of it. So that was the seed when I was younger than 14 of like, wow, maybe I could do magic on the street, you know. I got a table built from a local woodworker there in San Diego, and I just walked out to Balboa Park in San Diego with a deck of cards, a stick, and my hat, and just tried and started, and that was the beginning of that, very young.
So if I might, let's walk back to that moment. So what, you're 14, maybe 13, you've got a table built.
Yeah.
And is that the table that I saw in the video, or is it a different table?
So it's the same table. That tray stand I had ordered because I think I had bought Gazzo's Cups and Balls DVD, and he goes through what his whole setup is on the street: a restaurant tray stand and then a tabletop. So, you know, first my mom bought some felt and some velvet, and we put it around a cork board, and that was my first little close-up pad table. And then there was a woodworker, and he made this beautiful table. And I still have it. I've installed, with the help of good friends, because I am not mechanically super smart, installed some casino padding on it, and I've replaced the felt, but it's the same exact table. And there's a place in San Diego called Balboa Park that's a great street performing spot.
So you walk out, this is your first time.
Yeah.
What are you feeling? What I mean, you said you're an extrovert, so I'm assuming there's a little bit of, yeah, I can't wait to get out there. But I mean, walk me through the emotion here.
Sure. So my first time, I'm going to be with probably my dad, because my dad is driving me there, and he's set up across, you know, a few feet away so I can do my thing. And even though I'm extroverted, the scariest moment for a street performer, or at least for me, is piercing that sound barrier, you know, of you're in an area and there's a general ceiling of the dull roar of people talking and ambient noise. And as a busker, the first thing you have to do is blow a whistle, tap your table, yell, magic show. And the first time I was set up, I had my table, had my stick, and I remember standing there for a while, maybe 10, 15 minutes, looking around at people, because I was nervous to yell and break the sound barrier. It's probably the most, you know, it's getting over the hill. If busking is a roller coaster, that first tick, 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 and then once you yell and get people's attention and start the show, then you're kind of into it. You know, then you're drawing your crowd. But I remember that first time, I must have stood there for 20 minutes, just next to my table with a hand, just, okay, is there enough people? They look friendly. That guy does not look friendly. Like, so I remember being really nervous, but because I think I was inspired by David Blaine, and I had a little bit of experience just going up to random people and doing one-on-one type performances, it was more personal those first few times. Like, I would stop a family and be like, excuse me, sir, I'm doing some magic and card tricks. Would you like to see one or two? And then depending on their kindness or mood or charitable feeling, it was a lot of small, very intimate performances because also it was only a deck of cards.
When you performed that first day, did you do one performance or did you do several over the course of the afternoon?
I definitely did several. It was a bunch of small performances for families. Maybe a couple was walking by. And my dad just posted up with a coffee mug and a crossword and a book, reading for hours and, just keeping an eye on me and stuff. But it was a whole day, and I think I maybe made like $15 or something for 4 or 5 hours. And I was so happy. I could buy a Jamba Juice smoothie. I could, but it was addicting. And, as a performer, I like making people laugh. So it was, when you're performing on stage, sometimes there's a distance between the audience, but when you're street performing, they're right there. You know immediately if they really like you or if they really don't.
Wow. So today, how do you get the attention today?
Yeah, so much different, much louder, much more confidently. But I yell and I bang the stick on the table, fairly classic standard fare. Here in Los Angeles, I don't use the whistle because I'm a little more cognizant of the spaces are a little smaller. So I don't want to, take up everyone's space.
So you got other buskers around you.
Yes.
Is that what you mean by other space?
Yeah, in Santa Monica, there's a fair number of buskers, a lot of musicians, and they're all amps. I have recently invested in an amplification system. I've never used an amp and a wireless headset before. I've always just projected. So I'm excited to use that in music, which I think gives the show a little more feel. It's much easier to draw a crowd with all that. But for me, it's talking to people. It's usually just going into a monologue to start the show and start to gather the crowd.
And what's your favorite opener?
Yeah, so as I'm talking, a few of my favorite lines, because when you call for a show, people don't just show up and you have 50 people in front of you. You have to stop them. And some people don't stop and they just continue walking. But one of my favorite lines is, the magic show looks better when you don't walk away, I promise.
I like that.
Well, and then sometimes they stop because it makes them chuckle. Or
That's
like
very good.
It's really good. I've seen the show before. So those types of lines. And then I've been gathering a crowd with the egg bag.
Really?
Which I've seen your videos, and obviously your mentor and friend Denny Haney was the king of the egg bag. So I'm just at the beginning of my journey with the egg bag. But I've been using that lately to draw a crowd because it's a good trick that you can talk and mess with the bag and gather a crowd before you necessarily perform.
Yeah, it was a signature effect for Denny. And if you're interested in Denny's routine, it's in the Scott Alexander biography, which I know is very expensive, but the whole routine is in that book. I think the most valuable part of that book is the biography. I really do. I mean, it's fantastic, but the routine's detailed in there. So
well, and his shop. I was lucky when I started learning magic. I went to a brick and mortar real shop. There was a magic shop in North County, San Diego. And Bob Elliott, who was a really great magician and a consultant and worked with David Copperfield and a bunch of other magicians. I was a 13-year-old, 12 when I started learning magic. But 12-year-old kid spending all summer in a magic shop with these, no offense to them, with these crusty old guys saying, jokes that nowadays would just burn your ears off, learning magic and hanging out in the store with that community.
I think I'm becoming one of those crusty old guys, actually.
I mean, I've been performing for a while, so I understand it. I feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, when I started, there were a lot of crusty old. It was the Yogi Magic Mart, Phil Thomas. It probably doesn't mean much to you, but that was back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. That was the place to be. And but that's kind of where I did my thing.
There's a wonderful book on the Yogi Magic Mart that I definitely recommend. I believe it's written by Mike Rose.
Yes. Yeah.
So I
reviewed it on the channel.
Yeah, I also saw your review of it and I read it myself because my mentor, Don Driver, worked at the Yogi Mart for some time. And with this whole move to online, with the pandemic, we've done our best to create the online communities, but there is no replacement for just spending hours in a shop just with other people and learning and talking.
That's true. That's true. And I can remember sitting down at Denny's shop and you never knew who was going to walk through that door. It could be literally anybody. And it was a lot of fun to sit down there for hours on end. But when at the Yogi, of course, I was 11, 12, 13. My dad would take me down on Saturday morning. He'd pick me up like 11, 12 o'clock Saturday night. So the whole day I was down there.
It's wonderful. I mean, it really is. There's, when you talked about the Scott Alexander book on Denny Haney is expensive, but you're not paying for tricks. You're paying for this attempt at distilling the knowledge of these masters, of these greats. Our art is so contingent on passing knowledge down.
What I like most about that book, and why I think it's worth it, is that Denny really lives in those pages. I mean, the essence of Denny comes across mostly in the biography, but also in his material. But Scott Alexander really did more with that book than I think anybody else has ever done with a biography. And it probably is because of his personal relationship with Denny over a long period of time. But it's fantastic. It's fantastic. So go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to ask you, because, clearly you've performed for a long time, but you said that you've never busked. No. Is there a reason why has it never appealed to you?
No, it actually has appealed to me. Appealed to me. My story's a little different. I started about the same age you did. Well, actually, I probably just did my first tricks when I was 8 or 9. But I did my first show around 12, 13, and I was doing magic for family and friends, and some friend of a friend said, well, my kid's having a birthday party, can you do it? And my parents would drive me to these birthday parties. So I started doing kid shows. But my influences, and this is probably where you and I differ. Now, I was born in 1960, to put this in perspective. Okay. My first influence was George Goebel, who was a grand illusionist locally here in Baltimore. Okay. And then, now this is back in the 60s. And then, of course, in the 70s, along comes Doug Henning. And if he's before your time, you cannot imagine the impact he had on magic. Because he actually changed magic. I mean, if it weren't for Doug Henning, we'd probably all be wearing tuxedos today. Seriously, he absolutely changed the culture and perspective of magic. And so he was a huge influence. And then comes David Copperfield. So my primary influences weren't buskers, they were grand illusionists. So I started working toward the big show when I was a kid. I remember going down to the Magic Mart and staring at the zigzag illusion and salivating, you know, and then this was the epitome of magic to me. And I eventually built a big show and did a big show. And it's really, in hindsight, that's not the way to go. I would never advise anyone learning magic. I would steer them more toward busking or more toward close-up or table hopping than building a big show, because it's just not profitable for the vast majority of us. You know, you can get a fairly decent fee to do a show, but it costs so much money to build or buy these illusions and then transport them to the show and pay an assistant or a team. And by the time you're done, you know, it's just, you're doing it for the passion. George Goebel never made money from his show. He made money because he was a costume designer in Baltimore. And he financed the show. He had one of the great, huge, his influence was Blackstone Sr.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I think generationally we're probably different in that my generation was influenced by the Grand Illusion show, the big performer. And but here comes David Blaine, and to maybe a lesser extent, Chris Angel, and you know, you've got just a balloon of busking all of a sudden that's taking place. And I'm not sure David Blaine's responsible for that. I think busking goes back further, a lot further. I mean, it goes back to the Middle Ages, right?
Yeah, but he, I think certainly for television, introduced that, I think may certainly mainstreamed an idea of street magic. His is obviously more like guerrilla, one-on-one, walking up to people. But
this is way off the subject, but have you ever seen or met a violinist busker by the name of Prashenko, little girl?
Yeah, I had to wrap up my show because she set up near me and started playing. No, I mean, she's wonderful and clearly an internet sensation, and she certainly has the charisma to just kill it out there playing the violin.
She inspired me to study the violin.
That's great. I mean, she's really wonderful. Seeing her live, she certainly has a great performing energy around her, and there's a reason why she's had the success that she's had, you know.
I know she performs out there, so I thought maybe you'd run across her. She's really something.
Yeah, I just last afternoon, I mean, I walked past as she was performing.
Wow, fantastic. Fantastic.
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned going away from the violinist back to grand illusionists. My first magic set was a Lance Burton magic kit. It must have been a Halloween set or something, because there was a floating cauldron, color changing lollipop, and then like a VHS tape for magic. But that's what you were saying. I kind of thought that learning magic, I was like, I need to keep doves, and where am I going to store these giant illusions? So I think that's a pretty poignant perspective that you have as well, is that stage magic has also changed and shifted, I think, and we don't have quite the same spectacle.
I noticed in my performances today, 9 times out of 10, I'm surrounded or semi-surrounded. So if you think about that in terms of the magic that's promoted or put out there, or the magic that you might do if you're a platform or stage performer, forget about it. You know, I take enough. I don't always know what I'm walking into. So I take enough material that I can do the show no matter what happens, no matter what the situation. But so many times I'm leaving a fairly decent routine out simply because someone's standing behind me. And, you know.
Well, and I think one thing that I also really appreciate about busking is that the amount of flight time that you get on any routine is incredible. When you do 6, 7 performances, maybe a half performance because you can't draw a big crowd, so then you just do kind of an alternate show. It's incredible because you get working conditions every second with people surrounding you, with people walking up to you. A line that I use, because I don't really, I prefer trying to do a half circle show. I don't like the idea of a full circle show. But I always tell them that, you know, I promise you the show looks better from the front than it does from behind. And I kind of like tap my bottom back there, and sometimes they move and sometimes they don't, you know. I guess it just depends on what they want to watch that day. But yeah, I've always just also appreciated how spontaneous it is out there. You don't know what people are going to say or do, which is a fun element for me.
Yeah. I mean, I admire it. I really do. The buskers I've seen, and, you know, my favorite vacation resort area is Ocean City, Maryland. And you walk down the boardwalk in Ocean City, and there's buskers everywhere, but usually 3 or 4 magicians along the boardwalk somewhere. And almost one of them is doing a straitjacket. One of them has to do a straitjacket, which is a lot of fun.
My finale before the Cups and Balls was a straitjacket escape. Don Driver, my mentor, sent me a straitjacket, and that became my finale. Well, and then, I mean, Ocean City, Maryland, and other people, I mean, Jimmy Talks a Lot is a legendary busker, and he was in San Diego, and I got to learn from him. So he helped me go from just a stick and a deck of cards to like, hey, this is like kind of how you draw a crowd. You can like kind of do more of a show. And the way that he talks about Ocean City, Maryland, it's kind of a summer mecca. And I know some other magicians who've gone there to the Crossroads and became back much better performers.
Yeah, it's a great place to perform. And there's a place down at the end of the boardwalk where everything happens. It's kind of laid out in brick, but it's a natural circle in brick. And that's where I want to say the bigger acts perform, because it's right there in the heart of everything. But it's a great place to watch buskers. It really is. Really is. Hey, I want to tell you a quick story about the straitjacket. Denny encouraged me to do a straitjacket. So I got the Abbots. I don't know if you're familiar with the Abbots, but it's a wonderful little straitjacket. It's very heavy. It can be a nasty thing to get out of, even though it's gimmicked. You know, I mean, it's just because it's just the leather on it is like a ½ inch thick. So, you know,
those things get hot.
Yeah, you can't get the strap undone once it's done. So, but I was doing a lot of blue and gold dinners back when they had blue and gold dinners, you know, Boy Scouts and that sort of thing. And one of the things I used to do, toward the end of the show, got a Cub Scout up, and I had a bowl of peanuts on one side of the stage and an empty bowl on the other. And I handed him a spoon, and I said, now, if you can get the peanuts from this side of the stage to that side before I get out of the straitjacket, and I had this like grand prize, all these chocolate bars and stuff like this, you know, you win these chocolate bars. So I would get in the straitjacket. I'd have the adults put me in the straitjacket. Somebody had a timer. The kid starts running back and forth, and I see that he's going to beat me, you know. So when he runs this way, I run this way and I push his cup. And he runs this way, I run this way, I push his cup. Now the Boy Scouts are screaming, you know, cheater, cheater, cheater. But it was a nice way to get people fired up and angry at me. Of course, I beat the kid, and then they all booed, you know, because I cheated.
But that's the fun and emotional investment that our spectacle brings, you know. I mean, there's a plot, there's a character, you're now the heel, even though you're the performer. My most memorable story doing a straitjacket escape was a woman had seen me busking and invited me, and this was in early high school, invited me to perform at the Marine Corps multicultural day event.
Wow.
I am not sure if I was bringing any multiculturalness to the day's events, but I certainly was bringing some entertainment. And my two volunteers were these Marines who are very much in shape and perhaps the strongest gentlemen I've ever seen in my life. And I made the mistake of saying, because when you're in the straitjacket, part of really selling it is really how tight you're in there. So you want to make sure that the volunteers really make it tight. And I told a US Marine to pull as hard as he can. And it was on the crotch strap.
Wrong thing to say to a US Marine.
And I learned also that they're very good at following instructions.
Yes.
He ends up actually, a screw came out because he pulled so tight.
No kidding.
It was a mess. I ended up escaping from it, but I definitely walked funny back to the car.
Wow.
But my finale is the cups and balls now, in part because the straitjacket is just so much energy to perform.
It is.
If you're
It is
flailing and it's hot canvas.
Yeah.
Not humane working conditions, Dave.
Well, listen, I appreciate your stopping by and talking with me about this. Is there anything else you wanted to add, or?
I just really appreciate this opportunity. I think it's really great that people like us can meet online and then talk about the craft that we just love and care about so much. And lastly, I would just encourage everyone to try to busk. Go out with a routine in mind, bring a bunch of tricks, and just have fun.
Another question.
Sure.
Because you just said, I would encourage everyone to go out and bust. Now, let's say that somebody, me or anybody else, decides, you know what, I'm going to take you up on that. What would you say? What should I do or anyone else do who wants to bust, never done it before, in terms of choosing a location?
Yeah, you have to look for high foot traffic. That's the most important. So you can usually find, just local hot spots, local picnic areas, places where just people show up.
Are there any laws, rules, regulations that you have run south of, or that?
Sometimes like for instance, out here, Santa Monica requires you to buy a permit, which permits you for a full calendar year to perform on their locations. Some places there are no permits. Some places I would just always try to contact someone either at City Hall or Parks and Rec. If you kind of Google your city's name and then street performing ordinance or your city's name and busking ordinance, sometimes you can see if there's regulations. But just find a place with people and worst comes to worst, you're asked to move. That certainly happened to me. And then sometimes you just have to explain that you're not a vendor. You're performing something and they're donations. You're not selling something. Sometimes the local cops are, picky about that. But I just recommend everyone do it. It can be really fun. It makes you a better performer. And it's just the best way to, I think, really hone a lot of routines where you're interacting with people a lot.
Absolutely.
But
Listen,
I really appreciate this again, and appreciate your videos and your thoughts that you share on different topics. It's really important that we have people like your wisdom who know people like Denny Haney and other people and have your own thoughts and ideas on these subjects. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, one last question. Sorry.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to get in touch with you,
Mm-hmm.
by the way, we haven't talked about this, but a lot of the most successful trade show performers, which in terms of, well, trade show performing can be extremely lucrative, as we all know. A lot of the most successful trade show performers have come out of busking, out of the busking world, because it hones their skills specifically for that kind of an environment where in reality, you're standing there in the middle of a trade show floor and your job is to attract people over to the table, hold them at the table until the salespeople can deliver a pitch. I mean, that's the job. So I can't think of any better training ground than busking for that. So if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
You can feel free to find me on social media, Jeff Thomson, JeffThomson, no P. And then you can feel free to contact me on Instagram, Facebook. I have an email that perhaps we can put in the description or something like that. I really, feel free to reach out to me. I love talking about this stuff. I love forming connections in our community. Really quick, my mentor, Don Driver, is my mentor and someone who I love very much because he reached out via private message on the Magic Cafe, which is a magic forum online. And we messaged each other, then messaged on a different platform, and then would call each other, and then just became friends. And he was, decades older than me, 40, 50 years. And that's what also this community is all about, is making it a community. So definitely feel free to reach out. That aspect is really great.
Thank you again.
Thank you, sir. I hope you have a great day.
You also. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.